Well, hello, Tim Jupp. Tim Jupp, you were the pianist for Delirious. Tell me a bit
I was in a
about...
former life, yes.
You were.
It seems
Tell us
many
about that
moons
former
ago
life.
now, 10 years ago since the band finished.
And what have you been up to since Delirious?
So Delirious all in all was 17 years, so it's quite a big chapter of my life. And then in 2009 we started the Big Church Day Out in the year that Delirious finished. So we've to our 11th year, our 11th event now, I think, or 10th anniversary, I'm not sure which, this year. So that's been exciting, and that's been growing every year. And so it's kind of not really stopped, really, since the band ended.
And how have you managed to find time to be a dad in amongst all that you've been doing?
Well, I have an interesting life as a dad. I've got 4 children. I've got 3 girls and a boy. They're now from the ages of, they're 18, 21, 23 and 25. So kind of definitely out of those teenage years, trying to get them all married off at the minute and out of the house. That's the plan. And but obviously we had an interesting life with young children because we grew up with the band travelling. So that was both difficult and exciting. And I think probably the biggest conversation we had in Delirious, which never went away, was how we were managing doing what we do with family life. Because I think in the band, across the 5 guys, we had 16 children altogether. So it was a never-ending conversation of wanting to make sure we were trying to be good dads at the same time as being away. And so, yeah, it's something we've always talked about. But the great thing is, I think I'd look back and say we have no regrets in that. I think, one of the important things was the fact that we just did talk about it. And it was always a conversation, and we talked about the things that were tough with that, as well as, we had treats along the way, and our children got to see parts of the world that they wouldn't have seen otherwise.
And do you think it's important to raise your children to know Jesus?
I think the obvious answer is yes to that. I think you want your children to, you can't raise them to know Jesus. I think only they can choose to follow Jesus in that sense. So I think there's a sense where as a parent, yes, you want them in an environment where that becomes, the norm and accessible to them. But I think you find out in life, as you do in your own life, don't you, in the end that is a choice for people individually. I'm excited for my children. I mean, they would all call themselves Christians, and that's a brilliant thing, and they're all really following God in their own way, and they're all on their own different journeys with that in different ways. But I think as a parent, you kind of want them to be the best version of what God made them to be. So I think, the short answer is yes. The big answer is kind of bigger, almost bigger than that, if you know what I mean.
And how did you as a parent try and create that environment for your kids to have a choice around their faith?
I think what we've really always tried to do is be really good at talking. So communication's been a massive thing in our house. And I would say particularly my wife's brilliant at that with our 3 girls. And I think the fact that nothing was ever off limits. So we would talk about everything in our house all the time. And so our relationship with God and our relationship in church and with all those friends, that was just a very, very natural part of everything that got put on the table. And I think the main thing was, it wasn't like, oh, now we're going to do our God time as a family, and now we're going to do this time or that time. It was all part our life. That is our life.
And you're obviously very keen on your music. Are your kids also keen on music?
I've got one who's really keen, one who's a drummer. So he kind of plays for some known Christian bands, and he's much better musician than I ever was.
And was that something you encouraged with your children? Was your own personal interest in music?
No, I think what we've tried to do is to try and be sensitive to kind of see the things that they love doing, the things that attract their attention, and encourage them whatever we can see that they're buzzing on and get excited about. So for some of the children it wasn't music, others it was. And so if that was their thing, we're like, but it is a difficult thing. having done that all my life, when you've got a son who says, well, I want to be a drummer, you can barely turn round to him and say, well, you should, well, son, go and get a proper job, can't be a drummer, when he's grown up in it all his life and everybody around him has kind of been doing that for a living.
And is music quite a key part of your faith?
I think I would say for me, worship is really the thing where that's my go-to immediate default thing for where I really find a lot of connection to God personally.
And is that something you do as a family as well?
I think it's just music's in the house the whole time. It doesn't stop. I've got a kind of big TV on the wall in the kitchen and it's YouTube's on all day, every day, and there's just music in the house the whole time. I think we're in a great church in Littlehampton. I have to say it's a great church because my wife leads it. So, there's not an option there. But our kind of DNA and our focus is very much worship. We'd be a church that would easily just worship for 2 hours every Sunday and forget about having a speaker or anything. Like once we're into it, we'd just keep going if we could. So we're kind of that kind of thing. So it's always been a big part of our lives in that way.
And for your kids who are not quite so musical, is there a different way that you've seen them connect with God, and how have you encouraged that?
Funnily enough, I'd say all my children really connect with God through worship. Doesn't mean that, because they don't play an instrument, they don't have that. I think they've grown up in that a lot. And this is an interesting thing. I was talking to a guy the other day. He said, if I don't have musical worship in my life for a few weeks, I don't really notice it. But if I went a day without reading a book, I feel disconnected from God. So I think people do have different ways of connecting. And for us, music's just been very much a natural part of that. We had a difficult thing as a family just a couple of months back where my mother-in-law died, so the grandmother of my kids. And in that time, it's interesting to see when people are very vulnerable, their default thing was they'd sit around in the room with their cousins, also lost their grandmother, and their natural thing is they'll just start worshipping and singing together. That's their kind of go-to place.
And you mentioned there that your wife leads your church. How is it being the pastor's husband?
Yeah, well, sometimes I think I'm the pastor's wife because people still think it's still quite an unusual thing for lots of women, not that many women leading churches. It's definitely her calling. I don't know how she does it. Well, she does it with great patience is how she does it. I don't think I'll have the patience for it, but it's exciting seeing her do what she was definitely put on this earth to do. And I think it's an interesting thing, isn't it? Because being a church leader is a very difficult thing. And you live in the tension of, as the other half to that, of both wanting to see for me, seeing my wife really fulfilled and doing all that God's called her to do and encouraging her in that and pushing her forward in that, at the same time wanting to protect her from, the toughness of leading church. It's not an easy thing. And
what is it? What have you seen that's so tough about leading a church?
I think you don't, until you actually lead it, the weight of carrying something. And I think because I also lead something, because with a big church day out, so I have a team in that, and has a big vision. So I feel like there's a weight in carrying that. And so I think that's where we find a lot of connection together, because I know there's a weight for her in carrying the church. I mean, we're a medium-sized church of about 500 people. We've got 70 people staff, so it's kind of a big operation to run. We do loads of community stuff. So it's a pretty full-on job. And I think, when things don't go to plan, often the church leader gets the brunt of everyone's blame on things, and it's quite a thankless task at times.
And you mentioned their big church day out. You mentioned before you had some interesting stuff for the youth and children's work provision at Big Church Day Out. Would you like to tell me a bit about that?
Yeah, well, actually, the whole Delirious thing grew out of us guys being involved in doing youth worship stuff. Back in the early 90s, we used to gather over 3,000 young people every month on the South Coast for worship. So it's always kind of been part of our DNA. And now even in our local church, we have a real focus on releasing young leaders and seeing young leaders coming through. People in their teens. I mean, our meeting on Sunday was led by an 18-year-old and a 19-year-old in church. So we're kind of really into seeing young leaders released. And also we have a real strong leaning and emphasis, like we've talked about worship. So what I'm excited about is that with Big Church Day, I think one of the things that people forget or probably don't appreciate is we're probably, it's sad that Soul Survivor's going. We're all incredibly grateful for all it's done for so many years. But we're probably one of the largest, if not the largest, national event that young people go to. But because we're not a youth event labelled that way for the whole family, we've already got thousands and thousands of young people coming every year. So we're kind of going to make a bit more provision for those people who come, and also create opportunity for other youth groups who need somewhere to go after Soul Survivor. And we're creating BC Youth, and then we're going to do a bit more of a focused youth content around the Big Church Day Out, where people can come in on the Saturday and the Sunday and the bank holiday Monday mornings. We're going to be doing celebration meetings with teaching and ministry and real good Holy Spirit encounter, and a lot of worship and stuff for the young people, and then try and roll out more youth stuff throughout the year regionally. And we're working on those ideas at the moment, because we're not really an events company, we're a local church putting on a big event. So we're excited as a local church with others that we're in relationship with. We've got a team that's come together to deliver something which we think would be amazing for young people. And then you tag that onto the Big Church Day, which already has a full-time events team. We know how to run big events. We have 25,000 people turn up to Big Church Day every year. So kind of the event bit is the easy bit for us. And we're excited about being one option for people out of the several that I know that are out there. And it's really exciting. So many different things are going to go on.
And you mentioned there the youth provision. What do you think youth provision should look like? How would it be any different to adult provision?
I think we can have a bit more focused time and for that demographic, for that age group. And I think what I love about what we can do is that we can create a space for young people. At the end of the day, we just want to see people encounter Jesus in a really real way. I think where it's exciting about the BC Youth thing, because it becomes tagged onto Big Church Day Out, which is the whole family, one of the things we would love to come see through flow as one of the veins through the BC Youth thing is teaching young people to love the church too, because I think that's an incredibly important thing, that we understand that the church is incredibly, in all its diversity and difference in theology and all these things, we need to grow to love the church. Because as you see with even Soul Survivor coming to the end of the day, it was just an event, the summer event. Big Church Day Out is just an event, and one day that will come to an end. But the thing that's not coming to an end is the church. The church is around forever. That's going nowhere. And I think it's important that we see our young generation and kids love the church. And I would say, even as a parent now, when often speaking to parents with other children, who maybe struggle with that, I think one of the most important things, you need to be in a church where your children absolutely love it. I'm fortunate enough to say our kids have always loved church. We have a great church with a real focus on family. But I think that's a really important thing for people.
You mentioned that you've been part of Delirious and therefore been with youth work for a really long time. Are you seeing a difference between the young people you were working with Delirious to the young people we're seeing today?
I think that's an enormous question, isn't it? Because I think it's, culture is very different, and that moves on, and it moves incredibly fast. But then in terms of what are the fundamental things, in some ways things never change either. So the fact that you want to help young people to have a real personal relationship with Jesus, you want them to understand about grace and kindness and forgiveness and gratefulness and thankfulness, all those things that become the foundation, the mainstay to how you do life moving forward as a Christian. Those things kind of don't change, do they? And I think the way things look change. but fundamentally, having a relationship with God that's real and personal in some ways doesn't change. So I'm excited about, with BC Youth exploring all those things. Now, the important thing to say is I'm not going to be leading that. We're going to have a whole team of youth leaders and young leaders doing that, and that's what we're excited about as well.
And the same goes with your parenting. Have you seen your parenting technique change as your kids got older?
No, I think with parenting is a funny thing. I think when you first have children and babies and you suddenly think there's all those books out there on parenting, I think you suddenly realise, you read one or two, or start to read them at least, and then you suddenly realise, gosh, I think I'll give up on those books. I'll be like every other parent. We'll make this up as we go along. It's so different, isn't it, every day? And what's amazing is I think that's where the foundations of stuff are so important, because even now as a parent, I'm in a phase of parenting I've never done before in my life, of helping my children through a phase in their life, and they're choosing their partners for life, and some are getting married, and then sometimes it doesn't work out with their boyfriend or girlfriend, and you're helping through that stuff. And I think you're still in a phase where you're almost like, well, how do we do this? I've never done this before. So there's definitely not a rule book for all of this, but I think there are fundamental things which will equip you at every stage, and all those things that life throws at you. And I think, as I mentioned, communication, chat and openness, which results in relationship ultimately, is, I think, one of the key things.
And what was your experience of Jesus as a child?
I think I was one of those kids who probably became a Christian every 5 minutes, or every year, or every event he went to in the children's work, became a Christian again. So I had a real awareness about the reality of God, but I would say still as a teenager went through a process and a journey of understanding that this is a decision that I have to make myself. I'm not Christian because my parents are, and I think all this stuff, isn't it? We're still on a journey with it. I'm still discovering stuff all the time. I think the funny thing is, often in life, I'm now over 50, and somebody's thinking, well, so therefore I'm in the second half of my life. And often in the first half of your life, you spend years and years trying to take hold of things and work out all the rights and wrongs and everything. It seems like you spend the second half of your life trying to let go of everything, because you almost, as life goes on, end up with more questions than you had at the beginning.
And if you could say one thing to yourself when you were holding your first child for the first time, what would be your one piece of advice?
One piece of advice. I just think you just got to love them with all you've got. And I think, at that time you don't know what that looks like, do you? But when as they're growing up and they go through stuff, you find out what that means.
Amazing. Thank you so much,
Thank
Jupp.
you.